guys. So I've spent the last few sleepless nights going through kind of an old catalog of movies I like to watch. And I'm a Western guy. I like Westerns. I've brought it up a couple times on the show. I honestly don't know how you guys feel about Westerns. But in watching some of these, and the one that I guess that kind of started my mind rolling down this path was I watched a movie called Rio Grande, which Western fans will know that's a John Wayne, Maureen O'Hara, 1950. Well, 1950 is when this came out, and I guess my point, yeah. And so, well, my point in bringing this one up in particular is John Wayne, Maureen O'Hara. Those were like the leading man, leading woman in Hollywood at the time. not to mention the other cast of characters that is in this. Ben Johnson, I think Harry Carey Jr. is in this. But the major stars of Hollywood were in this Western, and it's kind of your boilerplate, cavalry fights Indians kidnap kids, cavalry saves kids from Indians kind of feel. And kind of generic, yeah. I mean, you'd say that's kind of generic. But again, leading man, leading woman, this was obviously a big Hollywood thing, Hollywood production. And it got me thinking. I was like, wow, you really don't see the leading guys. And now there are some exceptions, obviously. But you don't really see a lot of the leading people jumping to do Westerns anymore. So it just got me thinking. And so let me get a feel from you guys each, Pat and Danny. What are your thoughts on Westerns? Did you grow up with them? Do you like them? What do you feel?
Very good question. Very good question, actually. Yeah. Westerns are so I'm not a genre person, I guess. Sure. But growing up, as a kid, you're attracted to comedy, sci-fi, horror, cartoons, whatever it is that you like. Right. And Westerns was actually at the bottom of my list. I was not a fan of Westerns at all. Just didn't like, Shane or Wagon Train. Bonanza, my mom would watch it all the time. And, sure, I did not like it at all. I didn't like Westerns, and in defense of Westerns, I would pretty much avoid them. So I never really got I saw the ones that pretty much my mom would, to steal a line from Daddy, my mom would force me to watch. Otherwise, I would avoid them every chance I get until 94, 95 maybe.
Tombstone?
I saw, well, that was one of the things that turned it around. But before I saw Tombstone, I saw Unforgiven.
Unforgiven. Sure.
Yeah.
And when I saw that, and I don't know why I watched it, because it has to be Clint Eastwood because of Clyde. So he had a lot of good. I had goodwill. Clint Eastwood built up some goodwill with me because of Every Which Way But Loose and all that. So I gave Gene Hackman's in it. So I gave it a shot, and holy shit, that's still one of the best movies I've ever seen. Now I actually have to think about it. That might be the best Western I've ever seen, whereas before it was undoubtedly the best Western I've ever seen. So,
okay.
Long answer to your question is I was not a fan of Western. I was not a fan at all.
But now you're not. So you're more inclined to watch one now than ever.
Absolutely, I've seen. I never saw the Man with No Name trilogy before that because they were always on TBS and stuff. Yeah. But I just Western didn't give them a chance. And then later on, I was like, oh shit, this is Clint Eastwood. I loved Unforgiven. You watch the first part and you're like, wow, this is good. You watch the second one, you're like, this is really good. Then you start watching, the original Django and all that stuff, and you're like, this stuff is pretty good.
There's a lot there. Danston, what about you?
Yeah, so I think we've had this conversation so many times, and I really have to blame my dad on this because he did force me to watch a lot of these movies. But I also feel because Mexican cinema does have
lots of westerns.
A lot of westerns. I was gonna say a tinge. Those were movies that I kind of watched, but the ones that my dad really made me watch, again we talked about John Wayne and Clint Eastwood. My dad forced me to watch the Man with No Name trilogy, and it was this thing that kind of made me my mom had to do an assignment for college, so she had to watch Unforgiven, Tombstone. So these were movies that were westerns were just.
What was the class? How to Kill a Man?
I think it was an ESL class because I remember also watching what's his name? Richard Gere was in not a cowboy movie. It was
Urban Cowboy?
No, not Urban. Oh, Urban Cowboy.
That's
God.
John Travolta.
Yeah, no, but shit, it was like a first night or something like that. I don't remember what it was, but it was like it had to do with like tropes, like so like novelization tropes. Like so you had fantasy, you had westerns. So these were things that my mom had to like I guess learn a way to speak English via fantasy and westerns. But yeah,
so how often does your mom use the word partner?
Not at all. Not at all.
Does she tell you to get a lot? Get.
Yeah, she does.
But I don't think she did well in that class.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Shit.
Yeah, but I, like thinking of like all time like fucking westerns, like True Grit is.
Oh yeah.
Like
which one? The new one?
Yeah. See, that's what like I feel like if we're gonna like things that like really popped up into my like stratosphere, like the remakes, both remakes, like 310 Yuma and True Grit. Those are like things that I'm like, this is what modern Western should be, and and there's nothing like that because it's just sad.
So I feel like we get a really really good one like every 5 years or so. Like there is so and so that's one. So I love hearing those stories because I also like my parents like forced me to watch a lot of westerns growing up, but I really quickly got on board. I was a super big fan. But so it brings up a good point in to say, are there a lot of new stories to be told with these things? We've seen a lot of the good stories, and like I said, it takes about 5 years before you get another one. Yeah, why do you think that is? Do you think there's just like too much? Is there not enough like meat on that bone, or how do you feel about that?
I think it's kind of like what you alluded to it. So Rio Grande, you said you saw it in 1950. I'm no film expert. You saw it came out in 1950.
It came out in 1950.
I'm no film expert, but I like to play one on this show.
You too?
In 1950s old Hollywood, right? You have your big stars, like you said, the big stars, big production. The stories were pretty simple, but they didn't need to be overly complicated. It was the good guys versus the bad guys. There's whatever the central plot is, whether it's protecting the town, winning the girl, getting across America, whatever. And that was cool.
Heroes want to look like heroes. The villains want to look like
villains. Well, the white hats, the black hats, all that good stuff. It wasn't until 20 years later, right, 1968, 69, when you get like The Graduate, Easy Rider, Splendor in the Grass, all that good stuff. That's when you start to see, different types of stories, different types of actors and stuff like that. But between 1919 and 1969, that's a lot of years, and that's a lot of westerns. So there's I think with the western, it's I think it's liked so much because it's it's a classic American tale. And if you want to really not say a classic American tale, it's a classic good guys versus bad guys. And at the end, chances are you are going to feel good. You are. Right. It might be super violent, or it just might end with, everybody getting married to the person they want to get married to, but it will end on a happy note. Right. I think now to tell a more engaging story, things do have to be a little deeper. The characters have to be a little more fleshed out. The conflict has to be, maybe it doesn't necessarily have to be a little more multi-layered, but it can't be as simple as it was before.
Right.
And I mean, genres come and go. I mean, we'll talk about true crime later, but I mean, gangster movies used to be for decades, and they don't have the same clout they once did. I would argue that the spy thriller has kind of gone down a little bit, but westerns is just one of those genres that they're just musicals. We've talked about that. They just aren't as popular as they were before. But like you said, every few years, someone will do something amazing. So we'll get, the True Grit remake, or we'll get Unforgiven.
Open Range, man. Open Range is a movie that's like, a lot of people describe it's slow. It's slow. Well, no, it's fucking character development. Yeah. Like you're actually getting to know these characters. So when the end comes, which is anything but slow, you understand exactly why they do what they do. And I appreciate the shit out of that movie. That's a super good movie. But again, came probably 5 years after the one previous to it that made me feel that way.
Dude, I love that movie.
Open Range?
Yeah, so fucking good.
It's super good.
So I think so. It's a weird duality that I think moviegoers want. Like you want like the action paced, movies like, and I'm gonna name all terrible movies that have come out in the last couple of 10 years. We had Lone Ranger, we had Magnificent Seven remake, we had Cowboys versus Aliens, like all these things that like they're flops in a way. Like there's no heart. If you want characters like Lone Ranger, you have a Americana at its best, and you somehow muck it up. Like how can you do that? And something that's so 1950s is such a golden era, and stuff that Pat was talking about. The musicals, the spy thrillers. That was like at its height. Like everything was at its time. Like musicals were so big during like the 19 what I would say 40s to like 1940s to like 60s. To a certain time. Like it does die out. And getting like best, like a good musical like within every 5 years, or a good Western. I feel like as the audience we're changing so much, especially like with like you have the golden age of TV still at its height. I think we want this drawn out, and I think that's why when you talked about Open Range, is like that is a perfect movie. That's because really you have the character development that you get in what is it, like 2 hours? I think 2.5 hours.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
You know what? And I'm sorry. Go ahead, Danny.
No. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, and it may have something to do that we're a little bit further away from the idea of frontierism. Maybe that might have some. But then again, people still do enjoy medieval and fantasy type stories. But then again, those lean a little more towards. Those are less, I don't know, localized, and they're a little more fantastic. So I don't know if.
Right. No. Well, and I think that kind of gets to my next point. Exactly what you're saying. Is like to do a good Western, like, and I've watched some of these like kind of cut rate like modern Westerns that are on Amazon or whatever, and there's a look about them that makes them immediately pulls you away. And I would say that the cost to make a Western that is times period specific, so where everybody looks grizzled and the clothing looks old and the leather looks right, and there's no tire tracks on the road, and you know what I mean, like. It takes a whole lot to do an actual Western production. Like Deadwood, they killed doing Deadwood because it was expensive to make and it wasn't doing that well. You know what I mean? And so to do a sci-fi story where you get to just invent some cheap fucking costume to wear, that's much easier to do. So I think there's a whole aspect of like to do a good Western costs a lot. Plus nowadays, I think you kind of got to get a big name to get any kind of buzz. And do they want to do that anymore? I don't know. I think the money aspect, unfortunately, we're going to talk about the holy dollar for the rest of the year. The money aspect to making a good Western, and like also I have on here, like they don't do well overseas, so you're taking a risk in hoping that you get a really good domestic return, and I think that's really hard to do for a studio. Not to say that they can't be done. I would even say, There Will Be Blood. I mean, that's basically a Western. You know what I mean?
It's a Western,
And one perfect production. But if you think about it, how fucking much money did that movie cost to make? It must have been super expensive. Even with what limited space that they did. So, I think that's all got to be taken into consideration with where the Westerns, where have they gone?
You make a good point about the overseas market and the cost of them, because there was a point. I mean, and this I don't know as much firsthand, but based on the jokes that were around in the 70s, obviously Westerns and cowboys were incredibly popular because there's the jokes about, tourists, like the first thing they want to do is get a cowboy hat. Or people go to a foreign country and people are wearing, chaps and cowboy boots and stuff like that. The cost, that can make things a little more difficult. And I think you're right. I think because now people think, okay, I have all this money. Why would I make a simple Western when I can make this big, when I can make Hobbs and Shaw too? Why should I make something with a stagecoach and horses? Even though the better story might be with the stagecoaches and horses. I think a lot of it is, let's spend the money on the fast cars and the awesome special effects because people overseas will prefer that to seeing the dude in the cowboy hat, when actually that was a very, very popular thing. And I don't see any reason why it couldn't be again. The only thing is they do have to have that engrossing story. Like I don't know the numbers exactly off the top of my head, but I'm sure Django did well when There Will Be Blood. I mean,
Hateful Eight, yeah, fucking awesome.
I think
Hateful Eight. That's a great example.
I feel like and it's just I'm gonna echo what Blake has said. I don't think it needs to have a good it has to have leads, like really good leads, but also the director has to like have a love for it. You can't just have.
Oh, I agree. Yeah.
You just can't have like a person that's like, well, yeah, okay, I'll do this, and just not do anything for the genre. Like I feel like it needs to either change the Coen Brothers, change the whole tone of True Grit, and it just led to like the whole like modern or neo, like I guess the modern Western, because even then like we have like neo Westerns, I guess, like the ones that are now in our time, but they're still considered Westerns, like No Country for Old Men or Hell or High or Hell
like
Water,
Yellowstone or one of those shows.
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't know.
Longmire.
Justified.
So I mean, there's still a kick for it, but I don't think it's going to be.
I'm ready to saddle up, boys. Give me a Western.
Well, you bring up a good point, Danny, and it kind of goes back full circle to what Blake was saying about they had the biggest stars back then. I think somewhere along the line, and I don't know who started it, maybe Spielberg or Lucas or Coppola back then, but I think somewhere along the line, Hollywood became more about the directors than the actors, because back in the day, it was all about having Rock Hudson and Doris Day in the movie. Now it's about, okay, I got Steven Spielberg attached to this, or it's more about Steven Spielberg than Ryan Gosling nowadays. Like that's just the way the
dude. It's hilarious. Think about it. The only movies that have gotten like all the big actors in one place. Think about it. Comic book movies. That's where, and why? Because those are what fucking people spend billions of dollars on.
And it kind of goes to show that it kind of shows two things. That, like we were talking about, special effects are very important, but they're also simple stories of good against evil. I mean, absolutely. People don't need the stories to be that complicated.
Right.
So, I mean, I think now that I'm a little bit older, and even though the Westerns, like, I'm not a John Wayne fan still to this day, though I can appreciate a lot of those Westerns from that. But now, being an adult, I would love to see more Westerns come out, like good Westerns. I would like to see. I'd be much more willing to see them. I mean, I'd rather see a good Western than another damn teenage sex comedy.
Dude, when Westworld was fucking in the West, dude, it was really good.
So good. There's this comic book called East of West. It was so like Western specific, and then it went like this whole like post-apocalyptic turn, and I was like, no, you were so good. You were so good.
American Vampire, bro. American Vampire.
I know. Western. So there's tinges of Western out there. It's just for some reason they have to add some sort of sci-fi element to it.
Yeah, and then when they do that, you get Cowboys versus Aliens, which is an incredibly big disappointment. But